Maloni, it's 20 to 8. Welcome back to Pacific Mornings. I'm Alawai Lala. Now, the three strikes law is back with tougher penalties for repeat offenders. But what will it mean for Pacific communities already overrepresented in prison? Joining me to unpack all this is advocate Te'o Harry Fatutuleafoa. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. How are you?
Good, thank you. Morena, Ala, great to be on this morning.
Lovely. Now, hey, what do you think of the three strikes policy and its return? Is it fair or is it more punitive?
Yeah, look, anytime we shape criminal justice policy, one of the things that we have to be mindful of, it must be based on evidence. And this is one of those pieces of law where there's actual no evidential basis. I mean, the New Zealand Law Society pointed out that there's inadequate evidence that actually these three strikes laws will actually deter offending or even increase public confidence. So that's kind of one of the myths that we have to dispel, is that the three strikes law actually works. And, secondly, what this particular three strikes law does is that it actually ties the hands of judges, and it literally limits judicial discretion. So what do we mean by that? So essentially, if you get your third strike, a judge can't take into account your own personal set of circumstances. They can't take into account factors such as mental health, disability, or youth. Their hands are effectively tied. So that's what we really think, that this particular law is largely punitive, but it has no evidential basis, and it actually ties the hands of judges and cuts across one of the fundamental principles of sentencing, that every single person should be dealt on their own individual circumstances.
Hmm. Interesting point that you made there. I think for a lot of us who aren't familiar with the system, that's a really good explainer of what this policy actually means for people going through the system. Now, the government says it's restoring law and order, and they really highlight on the fact that it's targeting serious offenders and sexual violence offenders, and also strangulation, which they label as serious crime. Do you think this law will actually reduce crime or reoffending rates?
Well, simply no. There's actually no evidence to support the reduction of crime or recidivism. And the legal fraternity were quite unanimous when they gave their actual submissions, right from Te Hongaroa to the Human Rights Commission to even the Children's Commission. There's no actual reduction in crime or recidivism. And, contrary to popular belief, New Zealand actually has a tough stance on crime, like irrespective of this three strikes law. When you look at imprisonment rates per 100,000 people, we're double the rate of Canada and more than our UK and Australian counterparts. So, this whole rhetoric around tough on crime, it actually just doesn't work. And there's no actual evidence to support this. And I think, there's fears from victims that sometimes, their views aren't actually the views aren't, taken into account. But part of the sentencing regime takes into account the community and considers the interests of victims, allows them to participate in restorative justice, and affords redress for them should they have sustained cause loss or harm. So there's provisions to recognise the interests of victims as well. But essentially, this is just a government who have run out of ideas, who are recycling the same laws that just simply don't work.
Mm. Now, you work closely with some of the most vulnerable in our community as an advocate. From your experience, what are the key factors that drive people to reoffend?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple of factors here that we can look at. And one of the first ones is, 9 out of 10 prisoners have, untreated mental health or substance abuse issues. So we have to pivot from this tough or hard on crime to actually going harder on the drivers of crime. And if we're not examining or we're not treating mental health and substance issues, then we can expect the reoffending to also happen. Also, poverty, there's no denying that there's a direct connection between poverty, chronic unemployment, and crime. We have to actually
Mm.
build up that's providing, employment opportunities for our individuals who are able to reintegrate back into society to alleviate them from poverty. And then also factors like housing instability. There's another person who's back in jail simply because he failed to he breached his parole conditions simply because he was living in his car. And we've currently got a housing crisis, even though the government are in denial of it. But those simple factors contribute to reoffending. So we've got no places to place our individuals who are looking to reintegrate into society because of simple factors such as that. So anything from mental health to economic factors, also to simple things such as housing instability or bail compliance. These are actual issues that lead to further reoffending, and we need to actually resolve them.
Mm. And I just wanted to point out tomorrow, actually, on the show, we've got an academic from Otago University, Chang Yu, who will be on our show to talk about their recent article where they prove that reoffending and housing instability correlate. So if you want to hear about that, they'll be on the show tomorrow. But Harry, some really strong points that you're making there, and quite, I guess, confronting too, and for many of us, really interesting as well. How can reoffending properly be addressed and therefore solved? You already touched a bit about it too.
Yeah, look, I attended a college meeting last night, a community meeting last night, and they were like, the question was put out to our parents, how can we improve our kids' learning? And essentially, it all starts at home, and that answer actually applies here, eh? Like, the more we strengthen our families, the more we build stronger families, the better it is for our communities. We spend north of 190,000 to house a prisoner every year. And so it poses the question, would it not be better spent on preventative initiatives? Wouldn't we not just actually
Mm.
invest into programs like whānau order, which strengthens families and allow families to determine their own goals and aspirations? Would we not invest more in building financial literacy skills and employment opportunities like the work that they do at Uptempo? And then also the range of culturally appropriate non-violence programs, the Talanoa program, Flagship, the Kafa's Men's program, Ngā Waka Kainga at Cause Collective. These are tailored programs that are able to address not only offending, but also violence, and adding to the toolkit for our people to navigate tricky situations. And like we touched on, suitable accommodation options, not just concentrating offenders in one particular boarding house, but actually being able to cater to those kind of issues. So crime just does not happen in a vacuum. Right? It's just not something that just magically appears on our doorstep. There are drivers and there are factors that lead to it. And unless we address those factors, we cannot address crime. And so we have to look at those interrelated factors such as housing, economics, employment, and so on and so forth to be able to alleviate our individuals or avoid reoffending and recidivism.
Interesting that you touched on culturally appropriate methods. We just had Dr. Sione Vaka talk about tackling suicide within our community requires that too, and he's seen that in his field of work. So a really interesting point that you made there. Do you agree that such policies like bringing back three strikes would disproportionately target Pacific people?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's no secret that um, policing practices and also the incarcerated population largely are made up of Māori in particular, but disproportionately Pacific considering our population numbers. And so I think Associate Professor Carrie Leoneti at Auckland University pointed out that three strikes had a similar effect in California as it had over here, that it disproportionately impacts, African Americans or minority groups. And based off the previous government or nationals previous attempts of this particular bill, there were no measurable deterrent effects. In fact, there was an over-incarceration of Māori and Pasifika defendants who accounted for more than 50% of the strikes. So we know that for a fact this disproportionately impacts our people, and whether that's contributed by over surveillance, over policing, the likelihood of us being charged, or the likelihood of us being receiving a custodial sentence, all these factors contribute to us being disproportionately impacted by these effects. So there's multiple, factors to kind of consider here, but we're most likely, like our Māori counterparts, to be disproportionately impacted by this law.
Mm. And I guess for many who are wondering, well, if this doesn't work, then what else? What alternatives to this kind of tough on crime approach would you like to see that will actually work?
Yeah, I think to backtrack a little bit, I think there's a saying in Samoan, like we hold the solutions, and it's unfair to leave these issues at the feet of the criminal justice system. Churches, community groups, youth groups, they all have an important part to play. Like they all have an important part to hold our young people accountable, to make them feel like they belong, to, encourage their accountability or their support, whether it be pastoral care, social care, or whatnot. There's a role for everybody to play, and it starts with home, our parenting, ensuring that we're strengthening our families first and foremost. But I want to just pivot a little bit to an actual approach that has been proven and actually works in the actual courts. And I'm not too sure whether you know about the drug and alcohol courts. And this is a brilliant example, largely driven by Judge Lisa Tremulon and Emma Aitken out. We're talking out in Waitakere. They actually address the root causes of crime through rehabilitation, not just punishment. So they look at the actual driving factors around addiction and alcohol and drug dependency, and they want to break it. So it's a really intense program that they actually put the individuals through, but then they also ensure that they have an integrated approach, that they're able to address the actual needs of the individual to actually, meet those or resolve those drivers of crime. Not just that, but they also incorporate a culturally responsive and community-centered model. When they go through their graduation, their whānaus are a part of it. It restores mana of the individuals, but more importantly, we've seen a reduction in recidivism. And even if they do offend, it's less serious offence. So those are kind of like actual alternatives that actually work in court, backed by evidence, and as an actual example that the government could look to, but have once again rolled out that rhetoric, tough on crime, which actually leads to no results.
That's very interesting. And now I just also wanted to kind of change the topic a bit. I just wanted to touch on Cabinet considering limiting gang members' abuse and care redress, and what would the impact be if they limited which victims could receive compensation?
Uh, you know, it, First of all, these were victims at the hands of the state, right? These are victims that were in the care of the government. And for the government to turn around and say, we're going to limit your redress, your harm, your what is rightfully yours, and acknowledgement, just re-victimizes them. And not just that, it also exacerbates the distrust of the state. It was hard enough to get our victims to come forward. And yet now we're going to turn around and say, because you're affiliated, you don't deserve the redress, or we won't acknowledge the harm that was caused by us. So it's incredibly disingenuous, and it's incredibly um, distasteful from the state to limit actual gang members from receiving redress.
Mm. And what's your response to those who think prisoners or gang members shouldn't benefit from this?
Look, one of the key principles of a democratic society is that the rule of law applies to everyone. So it doesn't matter whether you're the cleaner, the prime minister, or a gang president. The law applies to everyone. And not just that, the remedies and the redress that's afforded by the law applies to everyone as well. So justice doesn't pick and choose its beneficiaries. Everybody that was harmed by the state deserves redress. And abuse doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're a gang member or the prime minister. It effectively, what this will do will effectively rob people from their healing. So, it's incredibly sad that we're hearing this kind of sentiment expressed by the government, and we hope that they will do it right by its members and its community, irrespective of their gang affiliation. And look, just in closing, prison, incarceration, three strikes, they are a product of political decisions. They are not a product of crime. They are a product of political decisions. And we have to rethink about this rhetoric on tough on crime. We have to look at the evidence, and we have to actually go harder on the drivers of crime to ensure that our people are able to start new chapters and reintegrate and rehabilitate into our society.
Mm. Man, what a powerful talanoa we've just had, Harry. Gosh, it actually made me quite emotional too. Someone from Mangere who grew up seeing a lot of that on the just at school and even in my community, and it's what we see on the streets pretty much, and just you highlighting that and how it
Absolutely.
hand in hand works together with what doesn't work in the system. So again, thank you so much for this talanoa. It's been very powerful. Whawhetai lava for your time this morning.
Lift it up.
Now, if you want to hear that interview again, oh gosh.